can you believe it's another week on? April is finished, May is here, hooray, it's my birthday month, yay! I didn't spend quite as much time reading in April as I did in March, partially because when I was setting up my Kindle I accidentally signed up for an Amazon Prime trial, and then when I looked at what was on Amazon Prime Video I discovered that Masterchef Australia, all seasons except the Back to Win season, were available, and I have gaps in my Masterchef knowledge. I had never watched season 1, season 3, season 4 or season 5. So I got stuck into it and I managed to finish 2 of those seasons, which is probably way more Masterchef than is good for one human in one sitting, 1 month. Wasn't all one sitting, I promise. So less reading. I also did quite a lot of sewing this month, which was quite a lot of fun. I am working on an Edwardian walking skirt, late 1890s, late Victorian Edwardian walking skirt. Finishing all the internal seams by hand and doing very meticulous hemming so that I can ease in the drastic difference in width between the base of the hem and where it actually needs to sit so that it fits my not 6 foot frame. So that's on its way. I'm about 2/3 of the way around the bottom of the hem, and then I'm going to have to go on an exciting adventure with an Edwardian skirt and go somewhere and get my husband to take photos of me, and I might just go down to Ordsall Hall, which is our local fancy place, I suppose, and prance around the gardens of a Tudor manor and pretend that I'm from ye old times, even though, you know, I know that ye is supposed to be the because it's a thorn rune. Finicky enough for you? Anyway, so what did I read in April? First off, I finished The Book of Life, which is the 3rd book in the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness. I have very strong feelings about this whole trilogy. It took me on a bit of a roller coaster. It was published in 2014 and it was a bit of a long-awaited sequel because the first 2 books were published 2011 and 2012, and it gave me quite strong feels, so I'm actually going to do a whole separate video on the trilogy and which bits I really liked and which bits absolutely got my goat. But long story short, I was kind of, by the end of it, I was reading it so that I finished the trilogy and I could figure out find out what happens, because I'd lost the joy of the plot at some stage. So it wasn't a totally great reading experience, but hey, that's fine. Not everything I read has to be excellent. The second book I read was a book called Tramanak, which was by Emma Burstall, published in 2015. It's a romance set in Cornwall. I read it as part of my great literature tour of the English counties, as an idea to kind of get some sort of insight into what the English counties are like, because I can't go there at the moment. However, Cornwall's pretty high on my list of places to visit because it looks amazing. It looks stunning, beautiful cliffs, incredible blue seas. I really miss the ocean. I really want to go visit the ocean at some stage, so Cornwall's quite a long way from Manchester, so I might have to go on a long weekend at some stage, but I'll look forward to that. They live in this community and it's kind of like the struggles of life. Rosie has some form of hemiplegia, and in the course of the novel, she ends up having a seizure and they figure out that she's actually got a brain tumour, which is quite substantial, obviously. So it's all about how the community draws around them. There's quite a beautiful romance that develops. It's not too on the nose between Liz and her boss at one of her jobs, Robert. He owns the restaurant in town. And yeah, there's another sort of, the other plot that dominates the book is that Liz frequently went to a newsagent's and bought lottery tickets every Thursday. Suddenly the newsagent wins the lottery on the day that Rosie has her seizure and Liz doesn't go back to fetch her ticket. So I wonder what happened there. And there's this kind of other plot about the danger of winning a lot of money very quickly, and the newsagent and her family end up going through an incredibly tough emotional time, which kind of serves them right. But, you know, in purely literary terms, this was also not it was a really fun read, but it wasn't like one of the great works of literature of our age. It was a bit of a beach read, which is great, because, you know, I can imagine being on the beach in Cornwall and reading a beautiful book set in Cornwall. A little bit kitsch at times, and there were some aspects of the characterization, like generally the characterization was lovely, it was really warm. I found Liz and her concerns very personable, and very empathy generating, but there were like those weird little character descriptions or action descriptions that happen a lot in books but don't happen in real life, like her daughter Rosie sticking her tongue out to concentrate on a fine motor task, and like that is something that is so, like, I've written this in a book and I've never actually seen, particularly I've never seen a kid do that. Like, I've never seen a kid while they're threading a needle. It's kind of like a idea that we have of something that we do, so, you know, it has ups and downs, that's fine. But I enjoyed the romance, it was well set up, it was well played out, it was never twee, and it was quite like it was very much a sort of fades to black romance rather than an explicit sex romance. So, you know, that was pleasant. I'd recommend it as a book to my aunt or my grandmother or something. How it goes. So book 3 that I read was my only Audible that I actually finished this month, was 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, published 2018. It was Turton's debut novel, and hell of a debut, incredible, like, whoa, nice. It's a weird and wonderful book. When I'm listening to audiobooks, I frequently have them on while I'm doing the dishes or cooking or something like that, or cleaning the bathroom. And every now and again, my husband comes in and just kind of looks at me and is like, what's going on in this book? And that was very much one of those books. I feel like I've done that, like, I've had like a what the hell kind of books. Between that and Piranesi, I've done quite a few what the hell audiobooks recently. But anyway, so The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle tells the story of Aidan Bishop, who is imprisoned in the strange world of a big country manor. It's set in the 20s, so, you know, my nice genre, I'm writing in it, so I like to read about it, so there we go. But Aidan Bishop wakes up each day in a different body, and he has various hosts, and the goal that he has to achieve is he has to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle in order to be able to escape this sort of weird prison that he's in, so that he can escape this reincarnation train, basically. So he wakes up first in Sebastian Bell, then Roger Collins, then Donald Davies, then Lord Cecil Ravencourt, then Jonathan Darby, Edward Dance, Jim Rashton, and Gregory Gold. Basically everyone at this big country house, they've all gathered to welcome Evelyn back after her finishing school in France has come to an end, and she's coming out to society, which means something different in the 1920s than it means now. But, you know, pretty much everyone in the house is actually awful, with the possible exception of, like, Jim Rashton and the butler. So 2 of the characters that Aidan Bishop gets inserted into, like, where's their bodies for the day, are not totally awful, but everyone else has, like, quite major flaws, or, like, are a little bit gross, or have, like, these major hang-ups, or something makes them unsuitable human to want to spend lots of time in their own brain. Among other characters in the book, there are obviously the titular Evelyn, who is part of the twist of the book, which is quite cool. Helena Hardcastle, her mother, the plague doctor, who appears to be on the staff, basically, who run the process, and he's the one that explains the rules to Aidan Bishop over time. There's Anna, who at the beginning you're like, okay, cool, who's this Anna woman? And then you figure out that actually she's also trying to work towards solving the murder. So Aidan and Anna pair up over the course of the novel. Then there's also the footman, who basically seems to be this crazy, like, dangerously sociopathic, knife-wielding, bent-on-violence serpent. Excellent Englishing there. That got 10 points to me. So, I've written in my notes that it was a delightfully trippy book to read, or to listen to at any rate. It's really well written. Like, I really wish I actually had a physical copy of this book, because there were a number of times that the narrator read something out and I'd want to go back and relive that incredible prose. The description of the environment, of feelings, of interactions was just really well done. I'm very, very impressed by Turton's beautiful handling of language when he was writing. So yeah, at some stage I'll see if I can find a second-hand copy so I can pick it up and add it to my heaving bookshelf behind me. Also so I can just read through that prose and figure out what made it tick so well in my mind. It was really lovely to experience, and I'm glad I listened to it because it was a really compelling story to listen to. But it's definitely one that deserves a reread, and I'm going to find it very interesting on the reread to see all the clues throughout that I missed the first time, because obviously it's this work of suspense. It's a really interesting concept. I've seen people go, oh, is it a sort of psychological experiment? Is it magic realism? Is it something that we might be able to do with science in the future? So, like, really weird and interesting. Basically, it turns out that the hall is a prison, which you start to suspect when characters struggle to escape. They can't leave, but it's actually a prison. Anyway, that's something that I'm really excited about, is that Netflix has started production as of December 2020, so we're going to have The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle as a Netflix miniseries, which will be so cool, and I'm sure that it's going to be all kinds of dark and twisted, because the book was all kinds of dark and twisted, but, you know, Netflix does that pretty well, and I think they'll handle the literary merit of Turton's prose quite well. It'll be sad to miss out on those really rich sentences and phrases that I don't actually have an example because of listening to it. But I'm sure they'll do the sort of decrepit, decaying grandeur of a gone-to-seed country house with absolutely horrible characters incredibly well. The final book I read in April was called The Court of the Grandchildren by Greg Fendison and Michael Muntersoff. It was published in March 2021, so hot off the press. I was actually emailed by the publisher and gifted a copy so that I could read it and review it. So this is part of my review. I've also left a review on Amazon and a review on Goodreads, so, you know, ticking all their boxes. I'm glad I reviewed it because it was actually one of my favourite books I've read in this genre for ages. Not that I've read a whole lot, but hey, that's fine. So, Court of the Grandchildren tells the story of Lily, who's a 20-something-year-old young person, and the whole novel set in the late 2050s. So, kind of the near future, and her great-grand-uncle, David. So, Lily and David are the two central characters in the story. The gist of it is that David has decided that he wants to die, and so he has to approach Lily and ask for her permission as his next of kin, because that's what the euthanasia law says. Lily says, I'm not going to give you permission until you've appeared at the Climate Court, which is the Climate TRC, essentially, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to deal with the generation that has been known as burners in the book. So these are the people who didn't take action to prevent substantial climate change and have basically screwed up the planet for subsequent generations. I had to do a little bit of thinking about where I'd fit in this chronology. So let's see if I can work this out. I'm going to work on the assumption that each generation has about a 27 to 30 year gap between being born and having children of their own, and I'm going to count backwards to try and figure out where I fit into all of this. So you've got Lily, who's 27 years old in 2057. So she was born 30 years earlier. So her mum had her in approximately in 2030. Then if you go back another 30 years, her grandmother had her mother in about 2000, which makes her mother about the age of one of my younger cousins. Now, if you go back another generation to Lily's great-granduncle or her great-grandmother's generation, that would take it to the mid to late 1970s, maybe early 80s. This puts me uncomfortably between one of these generations, so it's a little bit difficult to project myself. I'm about 9 years older than my youngest cousin and about 10 years younger than my eldest cousin. So my eldest cousin would be potentially approximately the right age to match, and my youngest cousin would be. So I'm in between. That's fine. It's quite an interesting thought experiment to figure out where you fit in this story, particularly as it's about the impact our actions have now. So what I totally loved about this book was the switching points of view between David and Lily, and I think it was handled incredibly well. The authors really took into account how different people would perceive their actions and their processes. Also, every now and again, these points of view were interspersed by trial transcripts, so it was nice to see what was like supposedly an objective trial transcript, and then to experience the same event through David's eyes, and then the same event again through Lily's eyes, which happened several times. And what I found really compelling between those different characterizations was how sometimes people's perspectives of an event really drastically differed. So frequently David, who's now quite elderly, struggled because he perceived that he'd spoken really well, but then watching back the transcript or seeing it through Lily's eyes, all you can see is how much he's repeating himself and how he's getting stuck on an idea. So there's kind of this very sensitive idea of how perspectives of our actions and of our words shape our impression of how well we're doing. And this idea of, obviously it's the concept of the book is that it's the court to the grandchildren, so difference in age and difference in life expectations, and I don't mean just how many years you're going to live, but also expectations of your life is really, really interesting. The Climate Court TRC was really well done. I think that it might be a good idea in the future to unpack all the stuffed up things we've done to the planet. Read yourself some books that are on Lena Norm's list of all the climate stuff if you have the energy right now. So yeah, Lena Norm's is a YouTuber who is very passionate about the environment because, quite rightly, it's the thing on which all the other things depend. We kind of need to get that one right before we can fix all the other stuff else we've made in the world. So other things that I really, really enjoyed from the book included the subtle but immersive world building. So this was a climate fiction novel, cli-fi, so sci-fi but about the climate. And in some sci-fi novels, particularly in the more sort of intense ones that are like space opera-y, I find that there's a little bit too much world building. I'm gonna explain to you a thing about the world and you're gonna listen while I expound on why this alien race hates us and why they're just like a monolith of society and there's no difference between individuals in the society and they all have the same personality, and that personality is basically to kill all the humans because conflict. So in contrast to that, this was actually really delicately done. There were lots of places where there wasn't an extreme amount of explanation and you were it was left to the reader's intelligence to infer what the steps that were missing, and that meant that it was really rich and really immersive and didn't hammer home the point too much, even on critical issues in the book. One of the sub-themes that was also really great was AI and the role of AI in human development. So Lily is part of a group called Humans First, and they're basically a sort of anti-AI organization who's against using AI in all forms of life. However, at the same time, she has what's called a Sherpa, which is essentially an in-ear AI that can record the world around her, can give her facts as needed, drives the car for her. So it's kind of a weird thing of how dependent she is on AI, but she's still against it being involved in all facets of life. So AI and the role of AI in human development and decision making, really cool theme to think about. Slightly, I mean, it's shot through the book, but has quite a delicate touch. It's not like a hammered home theme. So that was actually one of the things that I thought was a little bit weird about the book, is that some of the themes are so light touch, or like, they're very obvious that they are themes, but they're not substantially developed. So this I was definitely on the fence about, because on the one hand, if they were incredibly overdeveloped or like were hammered home, it would make the book heavy to read and boring and not as good. And so their lightness of the author's lightness of touch there really did them a lot of credit. But on the other hand, they could have gone to town just a little bit more and made it a little bit more front and center. So one theme that kind of frequently came up was ageism within society. Then there was a bit of pandemic and like genetic engineering mentioned, so how Lily and the youth have been genetically improved so they aren't susceptible to a virus like smallpox, whereas David's generation would have been around before they were able to be genetically improved to avoid smallpox, but after a smallpox vaccine. So in one moment there's like a terrorist threat to release smallpox in the climate court. Would have been quite drastic, because all the new young adults would maybe have got a little bit of a fever for a few days, but it would have wiped out the older generation. The other things that were really interesting, like the centre of the book is about climate, like the central disaster that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Climate deals with is the impact of the sea level rise. So there's frequent discussion of coastal refugees. They're called coasties, which is derogatory in the book. So climate refugees, climate refugeeism, and the struggle that they have to fit into society away from the beaches. So as I said, as a writer, I really enjoyed the lightness of touch on those themes. It felt like it was a really tightly edited book, and because there were two authors, I think they probably did a lot of that development very intentionally, which is great. I also really enjoyed the difference of the points of view. It's certainly given me some things to think about as I consider the role that I have in reducing our effect on climate, even though I know that a lot of that kind of high level, how many degrees we're allowed to increase the global temperature by, is going to be well beyond my consideration to impact. You know, getting the climate right's important. So that was my April book wrap. I've read 4 books. I enjoyed almost all of them, and I've been listening to a few books and reading another couple of books like in between all the others, but I didn't finish them. So I think that I've figured out that I have I have a little bit of a wave cycle in my reading. So one month I'll read 4-ish books, and the next month I'll read 6-ish books, because I've started but not finished books, so I end up finishing books in the first week and a half of the month, which, you know, it means that month gets a bump total. But that's fine, that's how life is. What I am enjoying is that there's more sunshine, it's finally spring, the blossoms are out, it's still cold, so I'm still going, oh, nice day to wear a dress and a coat and maybe a scarf and gloves. But that's okay, because I can go for a pretty walk and look at some tulips. So I think I'll go and do that now, and I'll see you soon.